When Undercover CEO Max Perry visits his struggling diners disguised as a regular customer, he expects to find dirty tables and cold food. What he doesn't expect is to hear the heartbreaking sobs of a young waitress named Bryn coming from the kitchen. His chance encounter with this exhausted server, who's working double shifts to pay for her mother's cancer treatments, will change everything. But what Max doesn't realize is that his connection to this waitress goes deeper than he could ever imagine. Watch till the end to discover the surprising truth that links Max's past to Bryn's present. A revelation that will transform not just his business, but his understanding of what truly matters in life. Max Perry's shiny leather shoes clicked across the marble floor of his corner office. The sound bounced off the tall glass windows that showed the busy city below. Max stopped at his giant wooden desk and picked up the paper his assistant Judy had left there. "Not good," he muttered, frowning at the numbers on the page. Max ran his hand through his gray hair. 20 years ago, he had opened his first blue plate diner, with nothing but his mom's recipes and a dream. Now he owned 30 diners across the state. He should be happy, but the paper in his hand told a different story. People weren't coming to his diners like they used to. The reviews online were getting worse. Customers said the food didn't taste homemade anymore. They said the staff seemed unhappy. Max slumped into his leather chair and spun to face the window. When was the last time he'd actually eaten at one of his own diners? 3 years? Maybe 4? He'd been so busy growing the business that he'd forgotten why he started it in the first place. The phone on his desk buzzed. "Mr. Perry, your 10 o'clock meeting is waiting in the conference room," Judy's voice said through the speaker. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes," Max replied. He turned back to his desk and saw a framed picture of his father. Old Joe Perry had run a small hardware store for 40 years. "Never get too big that you forget what it's like on the front lines, Maxie," his dad used to say. Max had forgotten that advice. He hired managers to run the diners and accountants to watch the money. He spent his days in meetings instead of talking to customers or tasting the food. The phone buzzed again. "Sorry to bother you, Mr. Perry," Judy said, "but I think I have an idea about the diners." "Come in," Max said, curious. Judy had worked for him for 15 years. She was smart and noticed things others missed. Judy entered, carrying her tablet computer. She was in her 50s, with reading glasses that hung from a chain around her neck. "I've been reading these customer complaints," she said, tapping her screen. "They all say similar things. The food isn't as good. The service is slow. The places aren't as clean as they used to be." "I know," Max sighed. "We need to fix it." "But how can you fix something if you don't really know what's wrong?" Judy asked. "When's the last time you ate at one of your own diners, Mr. Perry?" Max looked down at his desk, embarrassed. "It's been a while." "Then maybe that's where you start," Judy suggested. "But not as Max Perry, the big boss. The managers and staff will just put on a show if they know you're coming." Max looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" "Go undercover," Judy said with a small smile. "Pretend to be a regular customer. See how things really are when nobody knows the boss is watching." Max laughed. "Like that TV show? Isn't that a bit silly?" "Maybe," Judy shrugged. "But your dad always said, 'Never forget what it's like on the front lines,'" Max finished. He looked at his father's picture again. Dad would have done it in a heartbeat. Max stood up and walked to the window again. Below, people hurried along the sidewalks. Regular folks, many of whom might have eaten at his diners over the years. Families celebrating birthdays. Truck drivers stopping for coffee. Night shift workers grabbing breakfast at odd hours. His diners were meant for them. "The board meeting is next month," Max said, thinking out loud. "That gives me about 3 weeks. I could visit, say, 5 diners, get a good feel for what's happening. That sounds right, Judy nodded. I can clear your schedule, move some meetings around. But I can't just walk in looking like this. Max gestured to his expensive suit and designer watch. Everyone knows what I look like from the company website and the annual reports. Leave that to me, Judy smiled. My nephew Tyler is in theater school. He can help with a simple disguise. Nothing too dramatic, just enough so you won't be recognized. For the first time in weeks, Max felt excited. This wasn't just about saving his business, though that mattered. It was about remembering why he started the diners in the first place. He wanted to give people good food at fair prices, served with a smile in a clean, friendly place. Okay, Judy, Max nodded, making up his mind. Let's do this. Set it up with your nephew and pull the files on our worst-performing diners. Let's start there. Right away, Mr. Perry, Judy said, heading for the door. And what about your 10 o'clock meeting? Max grabbed his suit jacket from the back of his chair. Push it to tomorrow. I've got more important things to do right now. As Judy left, Max looked once more at his father's picture. You were right, Dad, he whispered. I've been away from the front lines too long. Time to remember what matters. Max picked up the phone and dialed. Judy, tell the driver I need to stop at home before meeting your nephew. I need to find some regular clothes. For the first time in years, Max felt like the young man who had opened his first diner, full of hope and determination. He was going to fix this, one diner at a time. Hold still, Uncle Max, Tyler said, adjusting the baseball cap on Max's head. They stood in Max's living room, surrounded by shopping bags from stores Max had never visited before. Gone was his tailored suit. Instead, he wore loose jeans, a plain blue t-shirt, and a light gray jacket that was one size too big. These clothes feel weird, Max complained, tugging at the stiff denim. And these shoes pinch my toes. Tyler stepped back to look at his uncle. That's because you're used to clothes that cost more than my monthly rent. These are regular clothes from regular stores. Exactly what a regular guy would wear. Max looked at himself in the mirror. He hardly recognized the man staring back. Without his expensive haircut and designer clothes, he looked ordinary. Tyler had helped him pick a pair of glasses with plain glass lenses and showed him how to mess up his usually perfect hair. Now, for your story, Tyler said, flopping onto the couch. You need a good backstory, or you'll trip up when talking to people. I thought I'd just eat and leave, Max said. Do I really need a fake life story? Tyler rolled his eyes. Waitresses talk to customers, Uncle Max. What if someone asks what you do or where you're from? You need answers that won't give you away. Max nodded. The boy was right. Okay, what did you have in mind? Your name is Mike Peters, Tyler said. You sell office supplies to small businesses and travel around the state. You're divorced. That explains why you eat alone at diners. You live in Westville, far enough away that nobody at the diners will know the area well. That's a lot to remember, Max frowned. We'll practice, Tyler promised. By the way, you need to leave your fancy watch at home. He pointed to Max's wrist. No salesman wears a watch that costs more than his car. Max reluctantly removed his gold watch. It felt strange not having its familiar weight on his wrist. And your wedding ring, Tyler added. But I'm not really divorced, Max protested. Mike, Peters is, Tyler reminded him. And Aunt Linda's been gone for 5 years now. You don't wear the ring for you. You wear it out of habit. Max twisted the gold band. Tyler was right again. Linda would have loved this adventure. She always said Max worked too hard. With a sigh, he slipped off the ring and placed it next to his watch. "Now, let's practice talking," Tyler said. "You talk like a boss, all direct and proper." Mike Peters needs to sound more relaxed. For the next hour, Tyler made Max practice ordering food, making small talk, and answering questions about Mike's life. Each time Max slipped up and used a fancy word or talked about business, Tyler buzzed like a game show buzzer. No CEO would say procurement. Just say buying stuff, Tyler coached. And stop sitting so straight. Regular guys slouch a little. By lunchtime, Max's head was spinning with all the rules of being regular. "This is harder than I thought," he admitted. "You'll get the hang of it," Tyler encouraged. "Let's grab lunch and practice in public. Nothing fancy. Maybe that sandwich shop down the street?" As they walked to the shop, Max felt exposed without his usual driver and town car. People passed him on the sidewalk without a second glance. No one held doors open or called him Mr. Perry. It was both uncomfortable and strangely freeing. At the sandwich shop, Tyler made Max order for them both. The young woman behind the counter called him Sir and didn't seem to care what he ordered or who he was. It was a new feeling. For Max, "You did great," Tyler said, as they sat with their sandwiches. "Though you still hold your napkin like you're at a fancy dinner." Max laughed. "I've got a lot to unlearn." After lunch, they returned to Max's house to pick a vehicle. Max's sports car was obviously out of the question. "What about my old pickup?" Max suggested. "I keep it in the garage. I used to use it when..." The diners first opened to pick up supplies. The blue pickup was dusty but still ran well. It was perfect, nothing fancy, just reliable. "One last thing," Tyler said, handing Max a prepaid phone. "Leave your smartphone at home. It screams expensive, and someone might recognize it as the latest model." Max took the simple flip phone. "Does this thing even have internet?" "Nope." Tyler grinned. "Just calls and texts, like it's 2005. Max put the phone in his pocket. "I think I'm ready." "Almost," Tyler said. "Which diner are you visiting first?" "The Sheffield location," Max answered. "It has the worst reviews, people complaining about dirty tables and cold food." "And what will you order?" "A burger and fries," Max replied. "It's our most popular item. If they can't get that right, there's a big problem." "Good," Tyler nodded. "And if someone asks about your job?" "I sell office supplies to small businesses around the state," Max recited. "I'm on the road 3 weeks out of 4. "Perfect," Tyler high-fived his uncle. "You're ready, Mike Peters." That night, Max laid out his regular guy clothes for the ETT morning. His plan was to visit one diner each day for the next 5 days. As he set his alarm, he felt nervous. More nervous than he'd been before giving speeches to hundreds of people. "This is silly," he told himself. "I'm just going to eat at my own restaurant." But it wasn't silly. For years, he'd made decisions that affected hundreds of employees and thousands of customers, all based on reports and numbers. Tomorrow, he would see the real results of those decisions. Max turned off the light and stared at the ceiling in the dark. Tomorrow, he would step into the shoes of the people he served. He would see his business through their eyes. And maybe, just maybe, he would remember what made the Blue Plate diners special in the first place. The blue pickup truck bounced over a pothole as Max turned into the Sheffield Diner parking lot. The big sign showing a blue plate with a slice of pie was missing a few lights. Even from outside, Max could see that something wasn't right. He sat in his truck for a minute, watching. It was 12:15 p.m. Lunchtime. The parking lot should be full of cars, but only 5 vehicles sat scattered across the cracked asphalt. A paper cup tumbled across the lot in the breeze, catching against the tires of a rusty sedan. "Here goes nothing," Max whispered to himself. adjusting his baseball cap lower over his eyes. The bell above the door jingled as Max stepped inside. The smell hit him first. Not the good smell of burgers and fresh coffee that he remembered, but a sour, greasy smell, mixed with strong cleaning chemicals. The floor under his feet was sticky. A tired-looking woman with gray-streaked hair glanced up from behind the counter. Her blue uniform had a small stain on the front, and her name tag read, Darlene. "Sit anywhere," she called without smiling, then went back to filling salt shakers. Max chose a booth by the window and slid onto the vinyl seat. He felt something sticky on the table and looked down to see a dried smear of ketchup that hadn't been wiped clean. The menu she handed him had fingerprints and a coffee ring on its plastic cover. "Coffee?" Darlene asked, already pouring before. He answered. "Yes, thanks," Max said, remembering to use Mike Peters' voice. A little rougher, a little less proper than his own. He looked around while pretending to study the menu. Only 3 other tables had customers. An old man reading a newspaper while eating toast. A young couple sharing a slice of pie looking bored. A woman in scrubs, probably a nurse, gulping coffee between checking her phone. The walls needed paint. The chrome on the counter stools was dull. Even the fake flowers on each table looked dusty and sad. This was not how Max pictured his diners. Ready to order? Darlene had returned, order pad in hand. She didn't have a pen ready and had to search her pockets to find one. "I'll have the blue plate burger with fries," Max said. "How's the burger here? I'm trying diners across the state." Darlene shrugged. "It's fine. Like a burger anywhere, I guess." That answer made Max's stomach sink. When he'd opened his first diner, the staff had bragged about their food. They'd been proud. This woman couldn't even pretend to care. "What happened to the old way of making them?" Max asked, fishing for information. "I heard blue plate diners used to mix special spices into the meat." "That was before my time," Darlene said. "The burgers come frozen now. Pre-made patties. Corporate says it's more efficient." She said the word corporate like it tasted bad in her mouth. Max winced inside. Those pre-made patties had been his idea 3 years ago. The numbers had looked good on paper. Cheaper meat, less prep time, consistent product. But he'd never actually tasted one himself. "Coming right up," Darlene said, walking away without another word. While waiting for his food, Max overheard a conversation from the booth behind him. "Remember how this place used to be?" a man's voice said. "We'd bring the kids every Friday night. The waitresses knew our names. The manager, what was his name? Mike? Mark? He'd come chat with us." "Martin," a woman answered. His name was Martin. He retired 2 years ago. "This place hasn't been the same since. Last time we brought the grandkids, the ice cream machine was broken, and the bathroom was out of soap." "Shame," the man sighed. "It was our special place for years." Max felt his chest tighten. These were exactly the kind of loyal customers his diners had been built for. Families who came back year after year, making memories over meatloaf and milkshakes. Darlene returned with his food. The burger sat sadly on the plate, the bun slightly squished on one side. The fries looked pale and limp. "Need anything else?" she asked, already turning away. "I'm good, thanks," Max replied, trying to hide his disappointment. He lifted the burger and took a bite. It was exactly as Darlene had described it, like a burger anywhere. Dry, overcooked, with no special flavor. The fries were cold in the middle, as if they'd been fried, frozen, and then not heated long enough. As he ate, Max noticed more problems. The ketchup bottle on his table was crusted around the cap. The napkin dispenser was nearly empty. The mop bucket had been left in the corner by the bathroom, where everyone could see it. A young man in a wrinkled blue plate diner polo shirt emerged from the back. From his clipboard and the way he barked orders at Darlene, Max guessed he was the manager. He never once looked at the customers or checked if their food was good. Instead, he spent 5 minutes on his phone before disappearing back into the office. When Darlene brought his check, Max decided to ask one more question. "Been working here long?" he asked casually. Darlene's tired face softened slightly. 8 years. It used to be a good place to work. Good tips, nice customers, decent benefits. "What changed?" Max asked, his throat tight. New owners cut corners everywhere. Cheaper food, fewer workers, no raises in 3 years. They don't care about us or the customers, just the money. She looked around to make sure the manager wasn't listening. "Most of us are looking for other jobs." "That's too bad," Max said, feeling worse by the second. "Yeah, well," Darlene shrugged again. "That's how it goes. Big companies forget about the little people." Max left a larger tip than the meal deserved. As he drove away, he couldn't stop thinking about what he'd seen. The dirty floors, the bad food, the unhappy staff, the disappointed customers. Had all his diners fallen this far? Were all his employees as disheartened as Darlene? Had his focus on growth and profits destroyed what made the Blue Plate diners special? Max pulled into a gas station and took out his notebook. He made a list of everything wrong at the Sheffield diner. Dirty dining room, poor food quality, unhappy staff, apathetic management, maintenance issues, no connection with customers. The list was longer than he'd expected. There was nothing good to write, nothing at all. The heart and soul had been sucked out of the place, leaving just an empty shell with a Blue Plate sign. As Max started his truck again, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Shame. He had built the Blue Plate diners from nothing, with his mother's recipes and his father's business sense. He had promised good food at fair prices in a clean, friendly place. Somewhere along the way, he'd broken that promise. The truck's engine rumbled as Max headed home, his mind already turning to tomorrow's visit. Would the next diner be just as bad? Was there anything left of the business he'd once been so proud of? One thing was certain. Max couldn't blame corporate like Darlene had. He was corporate. These problems had happened on his watch because of his decisions. If things were going to change, he would have to lead that change himself. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered as he drove, thinking of his father's picture on his desk. "I forgot what you taught me, but I'm going to make it right." Max slept poorly that night, his dreams filled with dirty diners and disappointed customers. He woke up early, feeling tired but determined. After a quick shower, he put on his Mike Peters clothes and headed out. Today's visit would be to the Lucky Star Diner in Millfield. According to the reports Judy had given him, this location had mixed reviews, some good, some bad. Max hoped it would be better than Sheffield. The drive to Millfield took almost 2 hours. Max used the time to think about what had gone wrong with his business. When had he stopped caring about the details? When had money become more important than people? The Lucky Star Diner sat just off the highway, its blue sign easier to spot than Sheffield's had been. All the lights worked, and the parking lot was clean. As Max pulled in, he counted 12 cars, not packed, but much better than yesterday. "Okay, Lucky Star," Max muttered. "Show me what you've got." A bell chimed pleasantly as Max entered. The first thing he noticed was the smell: fresh coffee, bacon, and something sweet baking. The floor was clean, and soft music played from speakers. In the ceiling. "Good morning, hun," called a cheerful voice. A plump woman with curly red hair and rosy cheeks approached with a coffee pot. Her name tag read Vicky. "Sit anywhere you like," she said, with a genuine smile. "Coffee to start?" "Yes, please," Max replied, choosing a booth by the window. As Vicky poured his coffee, Max noticed that her uniform was clean and pressed. The mug she set down had no chips or stains. The table was wiped clean, and the salt and pepper shakers were full. "First time at the Lucky Star?" Vicky asked, handing him a menu. "Yes," Max nodded. "I'm trying different diners as I travel for work." "Well, you picked a good day," Vicky said. "Wednesday is Meatloaf Day, and our cook, Hector, makes the best. Meatloaf in 3 counties." "That sounds perfect," Max said, surprised by the recommendation. At Sheffield, Darlene hadn't suggested anything. The diner was about half full. 2 truck drivers sat at the counter, chatting with another waitress. A family with 2 small children occupied a large booth, the parents helping the kids color on paper placemats. Several older couples sat drinking coffee and sharing newspapers. The place felt normal. Not amazing, but decent. The furniture was a bit worn but clean. The walls needed fresh paint, but cheerful pictures of local landmarks covered most of the faded spots. When Vicky returned, Max ordered the meatloaf with mashed potatoes and green beans. As she wrote down his order, he noticed something. "That's a pretty pin," he said, pointing to a small star-shaped pin on her collar. Vicky touched it proudly. 5-year service pin. Everyone gets one after working here 5 years. I've been here 7 now. "You must like it here," Max observed. "Mostly," Vicky said with a small shrug. "It's changed some, but we still take care of each other." While waiting for his food, Max overheard Vicky talking to another waitress near the coffee station. "Did you see the schedule?" Vicky asked quietly. "They cut my hours again. I'm down to 30 hours next week." "Me too," the other waitress sighed. "Tom says it's orders from corporate. Keep everyone under 32 hours so they don't have to pay benefits." "I don't know how they expect me to pay my rent," Vicky frowned. "My daughter needs braces, and without dental insurance." They moved away, continuing their conversation in whispers. Max felt his appetite fade. That "keep everyone under hours" policy had been implemented last year. Another decision that looked good on spreadsheets, but hurt real people. Vicky returned with his food. The plate was hot, the presentation simple, but appealing. Steam rose from the meatloaf, and the mashed potatoes had a small pat of butter melting on top. "Can I get you anything else, hon?" Vicky asked. "This looks great," Max replied. "Made from scratch?" "Mostly," Vicky said. "The meatloaf and potatoes are made fresh every morning. The green beans come frozen, though. Used to be fresh, but..." She trailed off with another small shrug. Max took a bite of the meatloaf. It was good. Not as good as his mother's recipe that they'd used years ago, but moist and flavorful. The potatoes were real, not the instant kind that many restaurants used. As he ate, Max observed the diner more carefully. The manager, a balding man named Tom according to his name tag, spent most of his time in the dining room. He helped carry plates, chatted with regular customers, and wiped down empty tables. Unlike the Sheffield manager, Tom seemed to care about the diner. When Vicky brought his check, Max decided to ask her more questions. "The food was good," he said truthfully. "Better than I expected." "Hector takes pride in his cooking," Vicky smiled. "We all try to keep standards up, even with the cutbacks." "What kind of cutbacks?" Max asked innocently. Vicky glanced around before answering. "Well, we used to have 5 people working each shift. Now it's usually 3. We used to get fresh vegetables delivered 3 times a week. Now it's mostly frozen. The maintenance budget got slashed, so things that break stay broken longer. That must be hard, Max sympathized. We manage, Vicky said, straightening her shoulders. The customers aren't to blame. They deserve their little bit of comfort and good food. As Max paid his bill, he noticed something else. A small bulletin board near the register with employee pictures. Star of the Month was written across the top, with Vicky's smiling face displayed. Next to it was a paper showing the softball. Team schedule. Blue Plate Blazers was printed across the top. Your team? Max asked, pointing to the schedule. Oh yeah, Vicky grinned. We play against other restaurants in the area. Tom sponsors the team, pays for uniforms and everything. It's fun, gets us together outside of work. That explained a lot. Despite the cutbacks, the manager had found ways to maintain team spirit and pride. The Lucky Star wasn't perfect, but it wasn't broken like Sheffield. As Max left, he noticed Vicky helping an elderly woman to her car, carrying her leftovers and holding her elbow carefully on the steps. That small act of kindness, taking extra time with a customer who needed it, was exactly what the Blue Plate diners were supposed to be about. In his truck, Max made 2 lists. The first listed problems: reduced staff hours causing hardship, frozen instead of fresh ingredients, delayed maintenance, benefits cut for workers. The second list showed positives: clean facility, decent food, quality, friendly staff, engaged management, community involvement, softball team, pride in work despite challenges. Max stared at the lists. The Lucky Star wasn't failing like Sheffield, but it was struggling. The staff and manager were fighting to maintain standards despite decisions from corporate, from him, that made their jobs harder. As he drove away, Max thought about Vicky's daughter needing braces and the waitresses worrying about making rent with reduced hours. He thought about Tom, sponsoring a softball team from his own pocket to keep staff morale up. These weren't just employees. They were people with lives and families and bills to pay. And despite everything, they still cared about serving good food with a smile. Max felt a mix of emotions: pride in the Lucky Star team, shame at his own disconnected decisions, hope that things could be fixed. Tomorrow he would visit the Pinewood Diner, supposedly one of their best locations. Max was curious to see what made it successful when others struggled. What were they doing right that he could learn from? The highway stretched before him as Max headed home, his mind churning with questions. Was it possible to make a profit while still treating workers fairly? Could he find a balance between business, success, and creating good jobs? Had he lost sight of what really mattered? 2 down, 3 to go, Max said to himself. The journey was just beginning, but already he was seeing his business and his own choices in a new light. Max checked his map once more before turning onto Pine Street. According to Judy's reports, the Pinewood Diner was the top-performing restaurant in the whole chain. Max was eager to see why this location succeeded, while others struggled. As he rounded the corner, Max had to check the address again. Was he in the right place? A line of people stood outside the blue and white building, waiting patiently to get in. The parking lot was completely full, forcing Max to park across the street. This can't be right, he muttered, double-checking the address. But the familiar blue plate sign confirmed it. This was definitely the Pinewood Diner. Max joined the line, pulling his cap lower. An older couple in front of him chatted happily about which pie they would get for dessert. "The blueberry is amazing," the woman said. "But Hank told me they have fresh peach pie today." "Who's Hank?" Max asked before he could stop himself. The couple turned, smiling. "Hank's the manager," the man explained. "Best manager they've ever had here." Knows everyone by name. Is the food worth the wait? Max asked, gesturing to the line. Honey, we drive 40 minutes to eat here, the woman said. Been coming every Thursday for 3 years. There's nothing like it. Max couldn't believe what he was hearing. People drove 40 minutes to eat at his diner. The wait to get in was about 15 minutes, but no one seemed annoyed. Instead, the people in line chatted like old friends, some even introducing themselves to newcomers. When Max finally stepped inside, the difference from his other diners was immediately obvious. The place sparkled. Every surface gleamed, from the chrome trim on the booths to the polished counter. Plants sat in the windows, their green leaves healthy and dust-free. The air smelled of fresh coffee, baking bread, and something warm and cinnamony. But the biggest difference was the energy. The diner hummed with activity and happy conversation. Every table was full. Waitresses moved quickly, but didn't seem stressed. Laughter rang out from a large family celebrating a birthday in the corner booth. Welcome to Pinewood! A tall man with salt and pepper hair approached, menu in hand. His name tag read, Hank, Manager, and he wore a standard blue plate uniform with a crisp white apron. Just one today? Yes, Max replied, a bit dazed by the atmosphere. First time at Pinewood? Hank asked, leading Max to a small table by the window. How did you know? Max asked. Hank's eyes crinkled as he smiled. I know most of our regulars, and we get a lot of them. I'm Hank. He extended his hand. Mike, Max said, using his cover name as they shook hands. Mike Peters. Well, Mike, we're glad to have you, Hank said, setting down the menu. Lena will be your server today. Friday special is chicken fried steak with all the fixings. Made from my grandmother's recipe. Before Max could respond, Hank was off, greeting an elderly man entering with a walker. Hank didn't just say hello. He gently took the man's arm, helped him to a reserved table near the front, and signaled to a waitress who immediately brought a cup of tea without being asked. A young waitress with dark hair pulled into a neat ponytail approached Max's table. Her name tag read, Lena. Hi there. I'm Lena, she said brightly. Can I start you with some coffee? Our house blend is really good, roasted locally. That sounds great, Max nodded, impressed by the mention of local coffee. When had they started sourcing locally? As Lena poured his coffee, Max noticed something strange. Her blue plate uniform was different. It was the same blue color, but the fabric looked newer, and there was an embroidered pine tree on the pocket. I like your uniform, Max commented. It's different from other blue plate diners. Oh, these are special for Pinewood, Lena explained proudly. Hank got permission to modify them. He said if we take pride in how we look, we'll take pride in our work too. While Max studied the menu, he watched the diner operate. It was like a perfectly choreographed dance. Servers helped each other without being asked. When a toddler spilled milk, 2 people rushed to clean it up, making the child giggle instead of cry. The cooks called out friendly greetings to regular customers they could see through the service window. Max ordered the chicken fried steak, curious about Hank's grandmother's recipe. As he waited, he noticed more differences from the other diners. Fresh flowers sat on each table. The water glasses were actual glass, not plastic. A bulletin board near the entrance displayed community events, employee achievements, and thank you cards from customers. The food, when it arrived, was nothing short of amazing. The chicken fried steak was crispy outside, tender inside, with pepper gravy that tasted homemade. The mashed potatoes were fluffy, the green beans fresh and seasoned perfectly. It tasted like his mother's cooking, like the original blue plate recipes that had made his first diner famous. How is everything? Lena asked, refilling his coffee cup. Incredible, Max said honestly. Best meal I've had in years. How does this place do it? Lena beamed with pride. Hank runs things differently here. He says food made with care tastes better than food made just for profit. Sounds like a smart man, Max said. He must have worked here a long time. 5 years as manager, Lena nodded. He started as a cook at another Blue Plate diner about 15 years ago. When they made him manager here, this place was struggling. He turned it around completely. How? Max asked, genuinely curious. Says it's simple. Treat employees like family, and they'll treat customers like guests in their home, Lena explained. We all get fair hours, and he fights to make sure we keep our benefits. He even started a program where we share tips, so the cooks and dishwashers get a cut too. Max watched as Hank moved through the diner, stopping at tables to chat, jumping behind the counter to help during a rush, even clearing dishes when needed. This wasn't a boss watching from an office. This was a leader working alongside his team. When Max finished his meal, he ordered a slice of peach pie. It arrived warm, with a scoop of vanilla ice cream melting on top. The crust was flaky, the filling bursting with fresh peach flavor. This tastes just like my mom's recipe, Max said, forgetting for a moment that he was undercover. It might be, Hank said, appearing beside the table. We use the original Blue Plate recipes here. Found them in an old file when I started. The corporate office sends us the new approved recipes, but we stick with the classics. Max nearly choked on his pie. The original recipes still existed? He'd assumed they were lost years ago when the company standardized the menu. The owner must appreciate your success, Max commented carefully. Something flickered across Hank's face. Frustration, maybe. The owner hasn't visited in years, Hank said quietly. I send reports showing how using fresh ingredients and proper recipes actually saves money in the long run because customers come back more often. But corporate just looks at the cost per item, not the big picture. If you could tell the owner one thing, what would it be? Max asked. Hank thought for a moment. I'd tell him to remember why he started the Blue Plate diners in the first place. These places aren't just businesses. They're part of people's lives. We celebrate birthdays, comfort people on hard days, give the lonely somewhere to belong. And that matters more than squeezing an extra nickel of profit from a frozen burger patty. Max felt those words like a punch to the gut. Hank had just described exactly what Max's original vision had been, before spreadsheets and growth targets took over. As Max paid his bill, leaving a generous tip, he asked Lena one final question. Why is this diner so busy when others are struggling? Lena smiled. Word gets around. People know we care about the food and about them. Hank says success isn't just about money. It's about creating a place where both customers and workers feel valued. On the drive home, Max didn't need to make lists of problems and positives. The Pinewood Diner had shown him what was possible. A busy, profitable restaurant that hadn't sacrificed quality or worker well-being. The solution had been there all along, hidden in plain sight. It wasn't about cutting costs. It was about investing in people and quality. Hank had proven that taking care of employees and serving excellent food actually made more money in the long run. Max felt a mix of hope and shame. The Pinewood Diner was exactly what all his restaurants should be, but it succeeded despite his leadership, not because of it. Hank had created this oasis of excellence by quietly ignoring the very policies Max had implemented. Tomorrow, Max would visit the Westbrook Diner, the fourth stop on his undercover journey. But already, his mind was racing with ideas for change. The Blue Plate diners could be saved. Hank had shown him the way. The sun was setting as Max drove home, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. For the first time since starting this journey, he felt truly hopeful. His father would be proud of the lessons he was learning, even if they came with the sting of recognizing his own mistakes. Rain pattered against Max's windshield as he pulled into the Westbrook Diner parking lot. Gray clouds hung low in the sky, matching his thoughtful mood. After yesterday's visit to Pinewood, Max had stayed up late reviewing employee policies and food supplier contracts. The more he dug, the more he realized how far his company had strayed from its original mission. The Westbrook Diner looked average from the outside, not as run-down as Sheffield, but nowhere near as inviting as Pinewood. A decent number of cars sat in the lot, probably people escaping the rainy weather. Max grabbed his umbrella and dashed to the entrance. Inside, the diner was busier than he expected for a Tuesday afternoon. Not packed, but steady. Booths along the windows were about half full, and a few people sat at the counter reading newspapers or looking at their phones. The place itself was okay. Cleaner than Sheffield, but with signs of wear and tear. A cracked tile here, a scuffed booth there. Nothing major, just the accumulation of small things that hadn't been fixed. The smell was pleasant enough. Coffee, grilled onions, and something sweet baking. "Welcome to Westbrook," called a young woman from behind the counter. "Sit wherever you like." Max chose a booth near the middle of the diner where he could observe everything. The young waitress approached with menus and water glasses. Her name tag read Bryn, and Max guessed she was in her early 20s. Her light brown hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. "Afternoon," she said, trying to sound cheerful despite obvious fatigue. Her blue uniform was clean but wrinkled, as if it had been pulled from the dryer and put on in a hurry. "Can I get you something to drink?" "Coffee, please," Max replied. "What's your special today?" "Turkey and dressing with mashed potatoes and green beans," Bryn answered. "Made fresh this morning." Something in her voice caught Max's attention, a hint of pride despite her tired appearance. This wasn't Sheffield's total apathy or Pinewood's excellence, but something in between. People trying their best in difficult circumstances. "Sounds perfect on a rainy day," Max nodded. "I'll have that." "Coming right up," Bryn said, writing down his order before rushing off to help another table. Max watched her as she moved around the diner. Despite her obvious exhaustion, Bryn was efficient and polite with customers. She remembered who needed refills and which table had asked for extra napkins. But there was something else, a distracted quality, as if part of her mind was somewhere else entirely. The food arrived about 15 minutes later. The plate looked appealing enough. Sliced turkey with gravy, a scoop of stuffing, mashed potatoes, and green beans. Not as beautifully presented as Pinewood's food, but far better than Sheffield's sad offerings. "Everything okay?" Bryn asked, her hands trembling slightly as she set down the plate. "Looks great," Max assured her. "Are you all right? Your hands are shaking." Bryn tucked her hands behind her back, embarrassed. "Just a little tired. Working double shifts this week. That must be rough," Max sympathized, wondering if this was another location where hours had been cut, forcing people to work doubles to make ends meet. "It's okay," Bryn said with a forced smile. "Let me know if you need anything else." Max took a bite of turkey. It was good, moist and flavorful. The stuffing tasted homemade, though the mashed potatoes had the slightly too smooth texture of instant. Not bad overall, just inconsistent. As he ate, Max observed the diner's operations. The manager, a thin man with a permanent frown, stayed mostly at the register, counting receipts and making notes on a clipboard. Unlike Hank at Pinewood, this manager rarely looked up at the dining room or spoke to customers. Halfway through, his meal Max heard a crash from the kitchen, followed by an angry male voice. "Damn it, Bryn! That's the second plate today. Those cost money." "Sorry, Mr. Wexler," came Bryn's quieter voice. "It slipped." "I don't want excuses," the manager cut her off. "Just clean it up and be more careful. And tell Earl he needs to. Remake that order for table 7. The dining room had gone quiet during this exchange, customers pretending not to hear the manager's harsh words. A moment later, Bryn emerged from the kitchen, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment as she hurried to deliver food to another table. Max finished his meal slowly, watching the interactions between staff. The cook, an older man with gray hair, visible beneath his cap, seemed kind when speaking to the waitresses. The other server, an older woman, kept patting Bryn's shoulder encouragingly. As Max sipped his coffee, he realized he hadn't seen Bryn for several minutes. Needing to use the restroom anyway, he got up and walked toward the back of the diner. That's when he heard it. The soft sound of someone crying. Pretending to look for the restroom, Max glanced through the kitchen's swinging doors. Bryn stood at the sink washing dishes, tears streaming down her face. The older cook, his name tag read Earl, stood beside her, awkwardly patting her shoulder. "It'll be okay, honey," Earl was saying. "We all drop things sometimes." "It's not that," Bryn sniffled, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. "It's everything. Mom's appointment tomorrow, the bills piling up, and now Mr. Wexler says I can't have tomorrow off, even though I requested it 3 weeks ago." "Your mama's chemo is tomorrow?" Earl asked, his voice gentle. Bryn nodded, unable to speak through her tears. "I'll cover for you," Earl decided. "You take a long lunch break tomorrow. Go with your mama. I'll tell Wexler I needed you to pick up my prescription if he asks." Max stepped back quietly, not wanting to intrude on the private moment. He returned to his booth, his mind spinning. This wasn't just about dropped plates or scheduling. This was about real people facing real struggles, trying to balance work with the hardest parts of life. When Bryn returned to the dining room a few minutes later, she had wiped away her tears and fixed her ponytail. The forced smile was back on her face as she approached Max's table. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked, her voice steady despite her reddened eyes. "Just the check, please," Max replied. Then, gently, he added, "Is everything all right? You seem upset." Bryn hesitated, glancing around to make sure no other customers needed her. Then, to Max's surprise, she slid into the booth across from him. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I don't usually dump my problems on customers. It's just been a really hard month, and today's especially tough. Sometimes talking helps," Max offered, feeling a connection to this young woman trying so hard to stay professional, despite whatever she was going through. Bryn took a deep breath. "My mom has cancer," she said simply. "Stage 3 breast cancer. She has chemo tomorrow, but my manager won't give me the day off to take her. I requested it weeks ago, but he says we're short-staffed." "That's terrible," Max said, genuinely appalled. "Surely there are exceptions for family emergencies?" "There used to be," Bryn nodded. "The old manager was understanding about these things. But when the company changed the policies 2 years ago, everything got stricter. Now it's all about cutting costs and maximizing profits." Max felt his stomach tighten. 2 years ago, right after he'd approved the new operational efficiency standards. "The worst part is," Bryn continued, "I can't even afford to quit. Mom's medical bills are huge. The insurance from this job helps a little, but I have to work at least 30 hours to keep it. So I work double shifts whenever I can." "Don't you get overtime?" Max asked, knowing the answer, but hoping he was wrong. "They keep us just under 40 hours, Bryn explained. "Most of us are scheduled for 38 hours exactly. We're technically full-time for insurance purposes, but no overtime pay. Another policy Max had approved without considering the human impact. The diner used to be like family, Bryn said, looking around the room with sad eyes. Most of the waitresses here are single moms, or people taking care of sick relatives. We used to cover for each other, help each other out. Now, everyone's just trying to survive. Max nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He wanted to tell her who he really was, to promise that things would change, but he knew he needed to see the whole picture first. "I shouldn't bother you with this," Bryn said, suddenly, standing up. "You came here for lunch, not to hear my problems." "Wait," Max said gently. "If you could tell the owner of this company one thing, what would it be?" Bryn thought for a moment. "I'd tell him to remember that his employees are people, not just numbers on a spreadsheet. We have families who need us, dreams we're trying to achieve, bills we're struggling to pay. And we want to do a good job. We really do. But it's hard to smile at customers when you're worried about how to pay your mom's medical bills or whether your kid has enough to eat." She pulled out her order pad and wrote the check, sliding it across the table. "Sorry again for unloading. On you. The turkey dinner's on me today. You were kind to listen." "I can't accept that," Max protested. "Please," Bryn insisted. "It's the one nice thing I can do today. Let me have that, at least." As Bryn walked away to help another customer, Max sat stunned. A waitress who could barely make ends meet had just given away a free meal to a stranger who had shown her basic kindness. Meanwhile, he, the millionaire owner, had been systematically making her life harder without even realizing it. Max left cash on the table, enough to cover his meal twice over, plus a generous tip. As he headed for the door, he glanced back and saw Bryn helping an elderly couple with their coats, that same forced smile on her tired face. Rain still fell as Max walked to his truck, but he hardly noticed it. His mind was full of Bryn's story, her sick mother, the callous scheduling, the bills piling up. And beneath it all was the knowledge that his policies, his decisions, had created these hardships. The windshield wipers swept back and forth as Max sat in his truck, not yet starting the engine. For the first time on this journey, he felt more than just business concern or pride. He felt real, human connection to the people who worked for him. People whose lives were shaped, for better or worse, by decisions he made in boardrooms far away. Tomorrow, he would visit one final diner. But already, Max knew that things had to change. Not just for profits or customer satisfaction, but for people like Bryn who deserved so much better than what his company had become. That evening, Max canceled his plans to visit the fifth diner. He couldn't stop thinking about Bryn and her mother. The young waitress's story had affected him more deeply than anything else he'd seen on his undercover journey. Max sat in his home office, staring at the rain through the window. The house felt too big, too empty. On his desk sat the notes he'd taken at each diner, along with employee files he'd asked Judy to pull. He found Bryn's file easily. Bryn Taylor, age 24, 2 years at the Westbrook location. Her performance, reviews were excellent, with notes about her reliability and positive attitude. Computer, search health insurance claims for employees at Westbrook Diner, Max said to his laptop. The information appeared on screen. Max scrolled through it, looking for anything related to cancer treatment. There it was, Ellen Taylor, listed as Bryn's dependent. Multiple claims for chemotherapy, radiation, and medication. Many had been only partially covered, leaving thousands of dollars that Bryn would have to pay herself. Max did some quick math. Even if Bryn worked 40 hours every week at her current wage, she'd barely cover rent and basic necessities, let alone massive medical bills. No wonder she looked exhausted. She was probably working a second job somewhere, or picking up every possible shift. "This isn't right," Max whispered, pushing away from his desk. He paced the room, thinking about everything he'd learned. Sheffield Diner was failing because no one cared anymore. Lucky Star was struggling but trying. Pinewood was thriving because Hank had created exactly the kind of workplace Max had originally envisioned. And Westbrook showed the human cost of bad policies. Max picked up his phone and called Judy. "Mr. Perry, is everything all right?" Judy answered, surprised by the late call. "I need information about an employee named Bryn Taylor at the Westbrook Diner," Max said without preamble. "Specifically, I want to know her schedule for tomorrow and whether she requested time off." "I'll have to check the system," Judy replied. "Give me a few minutes." While waiting, Max made himself a cup of coffee. The rich aroma reminded him of his first diner, how he'd carefully selected the coffee beans, insisting on quality even when it cost more. When had he started caring more about saving pennies than serving the best? The phone rang. "Mr. Perry, I found the information," Judy said. "Bryn Taylor requested tomorrow off 3 weeks ago. The request was denied yesterday by the manager, Peter Wexler. She's scheduled to work from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. And her mother has chemotherapy tomorrow," Max muttered. "Excuse me, sir?" "Nothing," Max said quickly. "Judy, I need you to call Peter Wexler right now. Tell him that Bryn Taylor is to have tomorrow off, with pay. Say it's a direct order from me." "Yes, sir," Judy said, sounding confused but not questioning him. "Anything else?" Max thought for a moment. "Yes. Find out which hospital her mother goes to for treatment. Send flowers. Nice ones, not cheap. Sign the card, 'From your friends at Blue Plate Diners.'" After hanging up, Max sat thinking about Bryn. Who was this young woman who carried such heavy burdens yet still tried to care for her customers? What was her story beyond what he'd glimpsed in the diner? Max opened his laptop again and searched the company's employee records. Bryn had started working at Blue Plate 2 years ago, right after her mother's diagnosis. Before that, she'd been taking college classes, nursing, according to her application. She'd had to drop out when her mother got sick. One detail caught Max's eye. Under previous employment, Bryn had listed Sunshine Day Care Center. Max remembered that place. It was just 2 blocks from his very first diner. Had their paths crossed years ago without him knowing? Max dug deeper, searching old employee records from his original location. He found nothing connecting Bryn directly, but a name in the kitchen staff from 20 years ago caught his eye. Ellen Taylor, line cook. Ellen Taylor, Max whispered. Bryn's mother? He searched for more information and found an employee photo. The woman had Bryn's same smile, same eyes. She had worked at his first diner for almost 3 years before moving away. Max remembered her now, a quiet, hard-working woman who had suggested adding rosemary to the meatloaf recipe. She'd been good, reliable. Max had been sorry when she left. "Computer, search old recipe files," Max commanded. Original Blue Plate recipes, 2005 to 2007. The files appeared, scanned handwritten recipe cards, many in Max's own handwriting from when he'd worked in the kitchen himself. But others were written in different handwriting, including several marked Ellen's suggestion or Ellen's version. Max stared at the screen in disbelief. Ellen Taylor hadn't just worked for him. She had helped create some of the recipes that made his diner successful in the early days. The special gravy for the chicken fried steak, the secret mix of spices for the meatloaf. Even the apple pie recipe had her notes in the margin. No wonder the food at his diners had declined in quality. They'd stopped using these original recipes years ago, switching to standardized, cheaper versions that any cook could follow without skill or care. Max leaned back in his chair, overwhelmed by the connection. Bryn's mother had helped build the foundation of his success, and now her daughter couldn't even get time off to take her to chemotherapy. The next morning, Max drove to Westbrook Hospital. He wasn't sure what he was doing, only that he needed to see for himself, to understand more about Bryn's life. He sat in the waiting room of the oncology department, pretending to read a magazine. At 10:30, he saw them, Bryn helping an older woman through the door. Ellen Taylor looked thin and pale, a colorful scarf wrapped around her head. Bryn held her arm gently, carrying a tote bag in her other hand. Max watched as Bryn got her. Mother settled in a chair, then went to check in at the desk. She looked different today. Her hair loose around her shoulders, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of her waitress uniform. Even in casual clothes, the dark circles under her eyes remained. He shouldn't be here, Max knew. This was invading their privacy. But something kept him rooted to his seat, watching as Bryn returned to sit beside her mother, holding her hand as they waited to be called. A nurse approached them with a large bouquet of flowers. Even from across the room, Max could see Bryn's surprise as she read the card. She showed it to her mother, who smiled weakly. Max slipped out before they could notice him. In his truck, he sat thinking about everything he'd learned. Bryn's story wasn't just about one waitress with a sick mother. It was about the ripple effects of his business decisions on real people's lives. It was about the disconnect between the company he'd meant to build and what it had become. On the drive home, Max called Judy again. "I need you to set up an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning," he said, "and pull all the financial reports for the last 5 years. Food costs, labor, benefits, everything." "Sir, is something wrong?" Judy asked, concerned. "No," Max replied. For the first time in years, something might be going right. "And Judy? Find Hank Morris from the Pinewood Diner. I want him at that meeting too." That afternoon, Max sat at his kitchen table with a stack of old recipe cards, the originals, from his first diner, including those with Ellen Taylor's handwriting. He read through them carefully, remembering how his mother had taught him to cook with care, to respect the food and the people who would eat it. Max thought about Bryn, working double shifts to care for her mother. He thought about Vicky at the Lucky Star, whose daughter needed braces they couldn't afford. He thought about Darlene at Sheffield, who had given up hoping things would improve. And he thought about Hank at Pinewood, who had found a way to honor the original spirit of Blue Plate diners despite corporate policies. By evening, Max had made his decision. The Blue Plate diners would return to their roots. Good food at fair prices, served with pride in clean, friendly places. And most importantly, they would be good places to work, where employees were treated with dignity and support. Tomorrow's board meeting would be difficult. The other executives would resist changes that might temporarily reduce profits. But Max was prepared to fight for his vision, the true vision he'd somehow lost sight of over the years. As he put away the recipe cards, Max paused at one for chicken and dumplings. In the margin, Ellen Taylor had written, "Food made with love feeds the soul, not just the body." Max smiled. Ellen had understood what truly mattered, what he needed to remember. The Blue Plate diners weren't just businesses. They were part of people's lives, both customers and employees. Places where food and kindness came together to create something special. Tomorrow would mark a new beginning for the company. And it had started with a chance encounter. An undercover CEO hearing a waitress cry in the kitchen. Max straightened his tie and took a deep breath. Through the glass walls of the conference room, he could see the board members gathering. Men and women in expensive suits chatted over coffee, checking their phones and laptops. They looked exactly like Max had looked a week ago, focused on numbers, disconnected from the day-to-day reality of the business. "They're all here, Mr. Perry," Judy said, appearing at his side. "Including Hank Morris from Pinewood." Max nodded. How did he react to being summoned to corporate headquarters? Confused, Judy smiled. And a little worried. "I think he suspects he's in trouble for not following standard procedures." "He'll find out soon enough that he's the only one who got it right," Max replied. As Max entered the conference room, conversations stopped. Board members took their seats, curious about this emergency meeting. In the corner sat Hank, looking uncomfortable in a borrowed tie, clearly wondering why he was there. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Max began, standing at the head of the table. "I've called this meeting because the Blue Plate diners are at a crossroads. We need to make some important decisions about our future." Max clicked a remote, and sales figures appeared on the screen behind him. As you can see, overall sales have been declining for 3 years. Customer satisfaction is down. Staff turnover is up. We're losing money and losing our reputation. Board members nodded grimly. None of this was news to them. "But not all locations are struggling," Max continued, clicking to a new slide. "One diner consistently outperforms all others. Pinewood." All eyes turned to Hank, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Last week, I visited 4 of our diners," Max announced. "Not as the CEO, but as a regular customer. What I discovered has changed how I see our entire business." For the next 30 minutes, Max described his visits: the dirty tables at Sheffield, the overworked staff at Lucky Star, the excellence at Pinewood, and finally, Bryn's story at Westbrook. "What I realized," Max concluded, "is that we've lost sight of what made the Blue Plate diners special. We've been cutting costs at the expense of quality and employee well-being. And it's backfiring. We're losing customers and good workers because we've forgotten our values." Frank Wilson, the chief financial officer, cleared his throat. "Max, I understand your concern, but the cost-cutting measures were necessary. Labor costs were eating into profits." "Were they?" Max interrupted, clicking to a new slide. "Look at Pinewood's numbers. Higher food costs, yes. Higher wages, yes. But also higher profits because customers keep coming back. They have lines out the door while other locations sit empty." "That's one location," argued Barbara Simmons from marketing. "We can't know if that model would work elsewhere." "Actually, we do know," Max countered, "because it's the model we used when we first started, when we had 5 successful diners instead of 30 struggling ones." Max clicked to another slide showing old photos of his original diner. Smiling staff, happy customers, home-cooked food. "We built this company on quality food and treating people right, both customers and employees," Max said. "Somewhere along the way, we lost that vision. Today, we're going to find it again." Max laid out his plan. All Blue Plate diners would return to the original recipes. They would source ingredients locally when possible. Staff hours would be restored, with benefits for anyone working 25 hours or more per week. Managers would be trained to focus on food quality and employee well-being, not just cost control. "This will cut into our profit margins," Frank protested. "Initially, yes," Max agreed. "But Pinewood proves that treating employees well and serving better food actually increases profits in the long run." "Hank, would you explain how your diner operates?" All eyes turned to Hank, who stood up nervously. For the next 15 minutes, Hank described his approach: scheduling that accommodated employees' needs, training that emphasized quality, community involvement that built customer loyalty. "My team stays because they're treated with respect," Hank explained. "That means customers get experienced servers who know the menu and care about doing a good job. It means less money spent on hiring and training. It means regulars who come back 3 times a week instead of once a month." When Hank finished, the room was quiet. The numbers were hard to argue with. Pinewood's success spoke for itself. "I understand some of you have concerns," Max said. "Change is difficult, and there's risk involved. But there's greater risk in continuing on our current path. We're losing what made the Blue Plate diners special." "What exactly are you proposing?" asked George Hampton, the oldest board member. Max outlined the changes. "Return to original recipes and higher quality ingredients. Restore full benefits to employees working 25+ hours. Implement fair scheduling practices. 4. Increase starting wages. 5. Establish emergency funds at each location for employees facing hardships. Create career advancement paths for workers. And I want Hank to oversee the transition," Max added, "as our new director of operations." Hank's mouth fell open in surprise. The board erupted in discussion. Some members supported the changes immediately. Others worried about costs and implementation challenges. The debate continued for nearly an hour. Finally, Frank asked the key question: "How will we pay for all this?" "The shareholders expect certain returns." Max took a deep breath. "I'm investing $15 million of my own money to fund the transition, and I'm taking a 90% pay cut until we've fully implemented these changes and returned to profitability." The room went silent. "This company was never just about making money," Max said quietly. "It was about creating places where people felt welcomed and valued, both customers and employees. I lost sight of that, and it's time to make it right." George Hampton, who had been on the board since the beginning, spoke up. "I remember when you opened your first diner, Max. You didn't care about expansion or profit margins. You cared about making good food and creating good jobs. I think it's time we got back to that." One by one, the board members came around. By meeting's end, Max's plan was approved. The Blue Plate diners would return to their roots, not just in food quality, but in how they treated the people who made that food and served it. As the board members filed out, Hank approached Max. "Mr. Perry, I'm honored by your offer, but I don't understand. Why me?" "Because you remembered what I forgot," Max answered simply. "That this business is about people, not just profits. You kept the true spirit of Blue Plate alive when I lost my way." That afternoon, Max sat alone in his office, looking at the implementation plans Judy had already started drafting. The work ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in years, Max felt true excitement about his company's future. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," Max called. Judy entered, carrying a folder. "Sir, I've been checking on the situation with Bryn Taylor that you asked about." "And?" Max prompted. "Her mother's treatment is going well, but the medical bills are substantial. Even with our improved insurance coverage, they'll struggle financially." Max nodded thoughtfully. "What if we created a scholarship for employees or their children who had to pause their education due to hardship? Bryn was studying nursing before her mother got sick." "That's a wonderful idea," Judy smiled. "I'll start working on it right away." As Judy turned to leave, Max added, "And Judy, thank you for suggesting this undercover visit. It changed everything." "I'm glad it helped," Judy replied, "though I never expected you to revamp the entire company because of it." "Sometimes we need to see things through new eyes," Max said. I'd forgotten what my father taught me. Never get too big that you forget what it's like on the front lines. After Judy left, Max picked up the phone and made one more call to Ellen Taylor's oncologist. Using his position as her employer's CEO, he arranged to cover all costs her insurance didn't. It was the least he could do for the woman whose recipes had helped build his success. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Changing company culture wouldn't happen overnight. Some managers would resist. Some board members might waver when initial costs rose. But Max was committed to the path ahead, returning the Blue Plate diners to what they were meant to be. And it had all started because he'd heard a waitress crying in the kitchen. 3 months passed quickly. Max had never worked harder in his life, but he'd never felt more satisfied either. The changes at Blue Plate diners hadn't been easy, but already they were seeing results. Customer counts were up at most locations. Employee turnover had dropped dramatically. Food quality scores had improved at every diner. There were still challenges. Some managers had resisted the changes and had to be replaced. The transition to fresh ingredients had caused some supply chain hiccups. But overall, the company was heading in the right direction. On a sunny Wednesday morning, Max pulled into the Westbrook Diner parking lot. This time, he drove his regular car and wore his usual clothes. No more disguises. He wanted the staff to know exactly who was visiting today. As Max entered, he saw the difference immediately. The floor gleamed. The booths had been reupholstered. New curtains hung in the windows, and fresh flowers sat on every table. Most importantly, the diner buzzed with energy. Customers chatting happily, servers moving with purpose rather than exhaustion. "Good morning. Welcome to..." The greeting stopped mid-sentence as Bryn recognized him. Not as Mike Peters, the customer, but as Max Perry, the CEO. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Mr. Perry, we weren't expecting you today," she stammered. "I wanted to see how things were going," Max smiled. "Mind if I sit at my usual booth?" Bryn looked confused. "Your usual booth?" "The one in the middle where I sat when I visited a few months ago," Max explained, "though you knew me as Mike Peters then." Realization dawned on Bryn's face. "That was you, the man I told all my problems to?" Max nodded. "I was visiting diners undercover to see what was really happening. Your story about your mother, about the scheduling problems. It changed everything." Bryn stood frozen, processing this information. Then, recovering her professionalism, she led Max to the booth. "Coffee?" she asked, still looking stunned. "Please," Max nodded. "And maybe you could take a break and join me for a few minutes? I'd like to hear how things have been since the changes." When Bryn returned with coffee, she slid into the booth across from Max. She looked different now, still young, but less exhausted. Her uniform was new, with the Blue Plate logo freshly embroidered. Most noticeably, she wore a genuine smile. "Is your mother doing?" Max asked. "Much better," Bryn answered. "Her latest scans show the cancer is responding to treatment, and the new insurance coverage has been life-changing. We're not drowning in medical bills anymore." "I'm glad to hear that," Max said sincerely. "And how are things here at the diner?" "So much better," Bryn said, her eyes brightening. "The flexible scheduling means I can take Mom to appointments without worrying about losing my job. The new manager, Lisa, is amazing. She actually cares about us and the customers." "And the scholarship program?" Max asked. He'd been especially proud of that initiative, educational assistance for employees facing hardship. "I've applied," Bryn said, her voice hopeful. "If I get it, I can finish my nursing degree while still working part-time. I never thought that would be possible again." Max looked around the busy diner. The place looks great. Busy too. We have regulars coming back who we hadn't seen in years. Bryn nodded. They say the food tastes like it used to, like homemade, especially the chicken and dumplings. That's your mother's recipe, you know, Max said. What? Bryn looked confused. Your mother, Ellen. She worked at my very first diner over 20 years ago. Many of our best recipes came from her suggestions, including the chicken and dumplings. Bryn's mouth fell open. Mom worked for you? She never told me that. She just said she used to cook at a diner before I was born. She probably didn't realize I went on to build a chain, Max shrugged. I was just the owner of a single diner back then. That's amazing. Bryn shook her head in disbelief. Wait until I tell her. She'll be shocked. Max smiled. Would you ask the manager to join us? I'd like to hear her perspective too. As Bryn went to find Lisa, Max sipped his coffee, looking around with satisfaction. This was what he'd envisioned when he opened his first diner, a place where people gathered not just to eat, but to connect, where employees took pride in their work because they were valued and supported. Lisa, the new manager, approached with, Bryn. After introducing herself, she shared how the changes had affected the diner. Higher food costs, but much higher customer satisfaction. Better employee retention. A sense of pride that had been missing before. The emergency fund has been especially important, Lisa mentioned. Last month, our cook Earl's car broke down. The fund helped him get it fixed so he didn't miss work. That kind of support makes people loyal. After Lisa returned to work, Bryn sat with Max a while longer. She told him about her mother's improving health, her hope of returning to nursing school, her appreciation for the changes at Blue Plate. Mr. Perry, she said finally, can I ask you something? Why did you decide to go undercover? And why did it make such a big difference to you? Max considered the question carefully. I had lost touch with what really mattered, he admitted. I was looking at spreadsheets instead of people, seeing the diners through a customer's eyes, and hearing your story reminded me why I started this business in the first place. As they talked, an elderly couple entered the diner. Bryn excused herself to greet them, leading them to a booth and chatting warmly as if they were old friends. Max watched, feeling a deep satisfaction. This was success, not just profit margins and growth charts, but creating places where both customers and employees felt valued, where a waitress could pursue her dreams while caring for her sick mother, where an elderly couple could feel welcomed and remembered. As Max prepared to leave, Bryn returned to his table. I just realized something, she said thoughtfully. That day you came in, the day I cried in the kitchen, that was when everything started to change. Not just for me, but for everyone who works here. Sometimes the most important moments happen when we least expect them, Max replied. One conversation can change everything. Max paid his bill and left a generous tip, as he always did now. Before leaving, he spoke briefly with each staff member, thanking them for their work and asking about their experiences since the changes. Every answer confirmed what he already knew. Treating people right was not just morally correct, it was good business. Outside in the parking lot, Max paused to look back at the diner. The Blue Plate sign gleamed in the sunlight, looking fresh and welcoming. Through the windows, he could see Bryn serving food to the elderly couple, laughing at something they said. What no one knew, not even Max himself until recently, was how deeply connected his story was to Bryn's. Her mother had helped create the recipes that made his first diner successful. Now, Bryn had helped him rediscover the values that made those recipes special. The circle had closed, bringing Max back to his beginnings. Back to what mattered. Good food served with care by people who were treated with dignity and respect. Max drove away. He felt grateful for that rainy afternoon when he'd heard a waitress crying in the kitchen. That moment of connection had saved not just his business, but his vision of what work could and should be. Sometimes the most important discoveries happen when we least expect them, in the most ordinary places. Even in a simple diner, on an ordinary Tuesday, when a CEO ordered a meal and heard a waitress cry. So, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Every subscription helps us share more stories that remind us of our shared humanity and the importance of kindness in the workplace and beyond. Together, we can inspire leaders everywhere to remember that business success and treating people well go hand in hand. Thanks for watching.